Welcome to our week 12 reflection on reading the Bible in 6 months. We are finishing up this week the second book of Chronicles, continuing to get a little in-depth look into the kings of Judah. And we see again there's some good ones and some not so good ones. And the good ones have a tendency to renew worship at the temple, clean up the temple, find the treasures of the temple, reestablish David's way, getting rid of the pagan households. But yet even the good kings have their days of being a little too self-important, and God humbles them. So hope you've enjoyed kind of getting that more in-depth, impersonal look in-person look at the kings of Judah. But by the end of Chronicles, we have the people being sent out into Babylon when Nebuchadnezzar reduces the city, takes the people away. But then King Cyrus of Persia, who overtakes Babylon, then allows the people to return. And that sets up for us then the book of Ezra. And Ezra deals with the temple and restoring and renewing the temple. And you got a little taste of Nehemiah, and he is the one who comes back as the governor, as the civil representative, and begins to reestablish or fixes up the city. So those two work in tandem with each other. And there's this theme of we've got a second chance, and how is it we are going to learn from our mistakes in the past so that we can establish a new nation that will never again have to be God will never again have to do this exile. But notice there is not a king, and we're going to be seeing that. Again, we're back to maybe that time of the first entrance into the promised land, where God is to be their king, and how is it they deal with that. The Gospel of John we finished up, and John has Jesus praying a lot. And telling his story, praying for his people, and being very open and forthright about the fact that he has to go to the cross, that he has to leave them, and will be sending them an advocate. And in John's Gospel, Jesus does get stronger as he goes to the cross, and his last words are, "It is finished." So all up to that point, the "it" was being explained by him, and wrapping up those loose ends of Peter's denial, and then Peter being redeemed as, "Yes, I will feed your sheep." And two examples of these stories are written down so that you may come to believe in the Son of God. And then we just got a little taste of Acts, which is, in fact, a sequel to the Gospel of Luke, Luke 2. And we see what happens after Jesus leaves. We have Jesus' ascension into heaven. And then what are the disciples to do? So as we begin to get into the book of Acts, that creates that. And especially I would invite you to look at verse 2, or in chapter 2, verse 38. That sets the theme for the book of Acts, about this, which comes first, baptism or the Holy Spirit. And as you continue to read through Acts, I invite you to look at how the church grows and how it is affected by people who are believers and non-believers, how they're setting up this community of faith, almost kind of again like we were doing with Ezra and Nehemiah. How are they going to set up their community to follow this message, to follow the way, the truth, and create this new life for people? So also keep in mind you have Peter and Paul are kind of some main characters. So when they show up, what are they up to? What's God doing with them? How are they going out and being those new evangelists? How does the church respond to good times, and how does the church respond to times of persecution? And another thing that kind of, we've seen a couple of these. You're going to see it this week also, or maybe next week, in the book of Job. How is the history of God's faithfulness used to create that bridge, the bridges between the stories, to show that example of God at work in the world? The book of Esther, you get to have some fun stories here in the Old Testament. The book of Esther is a melodrama. We're into kind of the dramatic part here. It's about life. How do the Jewish people live in a life in a foreign land? And the term Jew will begin to be used more because Jew refers to people from the kingdom of Judah. It's a short way of saying it, a nickname. I'm not quite sure where all this comes in sometimes, but so when you think of Jew, think of someone from the southern kingdom, the kingdom that remains and is still established, but it's those are the people that can trace their roots back to that southern kingdom. One little fun thing in Esther, note who is not ever mentioned by name but implied. And like I said, it's a melodrama, so you've got good and bad. And maybe starts to kind of show you why the Jewish people have had throughout history to deal with being the people who are marginalized and often portrayed as the scapegoats, and how God is able to bring good out of some of that stuff. Job, on the other hand, is a dramatic poem, a dramatic way of talking about the purpose of suffering. And like I said, it's a poem, so for some of you it might be a little more challenging, but kind of just get the idea of the three friends and his wife and their desire to have a reason for suffering. The new friend who is able to give Job a little more different insight and perspective. And as we go throughout this will take about 2 weeks to get through. Keep in mind how Job asks questions and how his questions get answered. And there again, he will finally turn to God, and God gives him a very interesting answer. So enjoy your drama this week, and have some fun with the book of Acts. I especially, just for fun, invite you in chapter 5 of Acts to look at the speech of Gamaliel and see how maybe that affected the early church and affects us today. Have fun, and we'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.